thank you to the professor who contributed to the joining course of applied methodology to this videos. As everyone knows, during all the courses offered by IMQP Science Knowledge, we had the opportunity to see the importance of multidisciplinarity in order to understand as complete as possible the archaeological site and their remains. Funerary practices give us access to a context and a history. Burials in general are inside funeral briefs and symbolic books. With this topic, Kaci, Louise, and I, we have tried to make an article to highlight the usefulness of different fields of study to explain this. So first, we try to give a really brief history of the discipline and the creation of funerary archaeology, which began during the 17th century. From this period and until the 19th century in France, the excavation of graves remains before all the treasure hunts, like interventions. But after some time, there is an interest in the archaeological dimension of this site. As these deposits are close the sets. This is a space that represents a snapshot of an area with no possible contamination of the water. So, from this moment, thanks to Henri Robinson and other people, and his first expedition in 1960, we witnessed the emergence of French school with the use of an analytical vocabulary adapted to archaeological and funerary data. The goal was to apply a reading grid specific to the discipline to systemize observation in the field and to apply typological vocabulary. Between the deposit, there is also another link between the deposit and the updates scientists had to describe the taxonomic processes, which was enabled with the theorization of the question of the decomposition of the corpse. The question of the sedimentary or atmospheric condition and their effect on the body, then on the skeleton also help to explain and to understand this process. Sorry. One of the definitions given for burial is defined by Hitler and so in 1998. It is a place where the remains of more deceased were deposed and where sufficient clues remain for archaeology to be able to expect in this deposit the desire to perform a funeral gesture. This definition was completed by Dende and Weston. They add that this is a positive and contrary regarding to the disease. And then I give the floor to Kaci.
Bonjour. We have a typological classification of bird. We then look at the criteria used to actually classify the bird. For instance, we look at the treatment of the body, as it can be a burial, an active deflashing, mummification, and mechanical destruction. We have the mode of deposition is also important as we have primary and secondary deposit. We have the number of subjects is finally dealt with as well. Then there is only one subject. It's an individual deposit. When there are several subjects, is a plural deposit. Uh, Next one, Nolwenn. Overview of funerary practice. We also try to retrieve an overview of funerary practice. During the Middle Paleolithic, this population were men, women, and children as well. Whereas during the Upper Paleolithic, for a certain period, there is no voluntary primary burial clearly identified. It's a period marked by social structure that are a little more legible in funeral gesture. And we are starting to see the deposit of funerary furniture appear. Then, as early as the Mesolithic, there is also the appearance of cremation, which help to speed up the deflation process. And before sedentarization takes place, burials are mainly in the domestic space. After sedentarization then marks dissociation of the space of the dead and that of the living. Here we also witness a funerary monumentalism reserved for a minority. The case this necropolis raised the question of their value for social structuring of the territory. We also have the culture of urn filled with necropolis with funerary urns, especially at the end of the Bronze Age. Crossing archaeological data with data from biological anthropology make it possible to replace the tomb in its regional context and its archaeological culture. It alone use to identify in this context the structuring which is repeated and are code allowing to interpret possible right. Louise?
And after that long introduction, the main aim of our subject was actually to question ourselves regarding the place and the importance of a multidisciplinary approach to actually explain these rites and these practices. And so, in order to actually look at what role could have that approach, we focused on the discovery, which was made in 2000, of the Grotte de Cussac, which is located in the south of France, in Dordogne, and which was not studied until 2010. And so this case has been period, which is an European Upper Paleolithic culture known for its large open air and rock shelter sites, diverse subsistence, cave ornamentation, human figures, body decorations, and elaborated burials.
In this case, measure and called 1,060 kilometers long. It has revealed three rocks of interest. The first one is made of, you see that, of 63 bones, within which there are two brain, small marrow, and little bones infused epiphysis, diffuse sections, the fragmented mandible, and four isolated mandible ridges that likely derive from the mandible. It has been found in two years. And it's associated with the presence of red pigments with engraving on the wall. The second locus is also marked by the presence of bones from the complete adults. individual engraving on the walls. And the last locus. The street is made of several block remains, like the precedent locus. Um, there is a river ring and a magical coding books. Kaci, it's your turn.
For the method, as the scientists were in karst environment and were not allowed to touch the archaeological material for conservation purpose. The only analyses available were in situ observation and photography. Some 3D analysis was also performed. Scientists study the rock are with structurally no invasive study consisting of the surveying analysis from distance and topography, photography, photogrammetrics, and laser grammetric recording.
From different fields of study have been conducted, such as we'll see, and as we've said, geology, rock art, paleontology, and paleoanthropology. And so that was done in order to determine the relative chronology of the events that occurred in the cave, the significant remains that were found. So, for instance, regarding the geology, the morphology of the Cussac Cave is actually very linear and follows the ancient course of an underground river with a succession of meanders, sinuous passages, and low or raised passages that sometimes cut through it. The rock art analysis, the scientists showed the analysis showed that there were only panels of interwound engravings. There were also single engravings and rare ochre or black colored non-figurative marks. And so these mammoths, horses, and also female figures. And so the fact that there were pigments containing, for instance, charcoal or other organic elements were found. The fact that they were found made it possible to actually date them. And so they were provisionally dated for the gravation period based on their stylistic similarity to other cave art that were found. So the paleontology and the paleoanthropological data and analysis that were conducted regarding the faunal remains, the analysis showed the presence of bears, which were actually the animal which was most present in the cave, with the presence of hibernation hollows. There was also the presence of small carnivores, Chiroptera, and other meso and microfauna. And so regarding the paleoanthropological remain study, it revealed that there were several forms of deposition. There were displacements and removals also of elements that indicate dispersed and complex mortuary behaviors. And now we'll see how we've seen here the different studies that have been conducted with the field. Talk about an overall multidisciplinary synthesis. So there were regarding the human removals and elements, and so now what we've seen is that we've been talking about each analysis that has been conducted regarding each field of study. And so what we can do now is an overall multidisciplinary synthesis and show how, if it is important to actually have a synthesis with all the approaches. So with a multidisciplinary approach, so by combining all the studies that have been made, what we can see is that here there is an attestation first of a human remain, here in bare net and in a decorated cave, which is actually quite unique for the gravation period. And so what we can say from these remains is that since they're in bare hollows, it suggests a deliberate deposition in actually a structure, so the will to actually give a proper burial to a population. And it's actually reinforced by the fact that there are red pigments and that it's in a karstic structure, so in a decorated cave. Secondly, there's the fact that Blockers 2, for example, seems to be a primary deposit, whereas the other deposits are also organized. thus suggesting an intention behind those deposits. Moreover, so there are primary deposits, there are also secondary deposits, but here we can see in those secondary deposits that there's an absence of cranial remains, which suggests that there's actually a selection of the skeletal remains that are being selected in the burial, and so that these are actually burials that have been thought through. Then the hypothesis of post-mortem manipulation has also been suggested for some of the Rockies, especially the Rockies 2. And as for the number of individuals, scientists have counted up to 5 adult adults and 1 teenager. And they were all found, the teenager, for instance, was found in the hollow of the cave floor. So what we can say, moreover, is the fact that with dating that has been done, there's a certain contemporaneity of the mortuary rites and the art that is actually really highly likely, considering the very homogeneous style in the cave and the virtually identical carbon-14 dates for a human bone and a charcoal sample that have been conducted. And so there's also the fact that regarding there was an analysis made for the art panel that actually explained that art as being likely the result of a collective image-making performance, which if you then take into account the art, the human remains, the pigment, and everything, it possibly could actually participate this art to a social network requiring a long-term transmission of values all around those burials. And so what we can actually see throughout this, throughout having a multidisciplinary approach to the remains that have been found in the Cussac Cave is the fact that we see complex behaviors, but we can only actually put the hypothesis that these are actually behaviors with all the data from each discipline. It cannot be made with only the remains or only the pigments or only each thing. It's the whole that actually enables us to suggest that these are funerary practices and actually proper behaviors. And so in that sense, we believe that the Cave of Cussac is actually an example illustrating the importance of multidisciplinarity in prehistory. Next slide, please. Yep. And it is because of the association of paleoanthropological studies, art, and the geology of the site also the paleontological data that we shed light on the whole of the behavior and funerary practices that we can retrieve from the remains found, and so that we can retrieve from the Brevetian populations in Europe for the Upper Paleolithic.
Thank you very much.